Crochet is a process of creating fabric by interlocking loops of yarn, thread, or strands of other materials using a crochet hook. The name is taken from the French word crochet, meaning small hook. These are made of materials such as metal, wood, or plastic and are manufactured commercially and produced in artisan workshops. The salient difference between crochet and knitting, beyond the implements used for their production, is that each stitch in crochet is completed before proceeding with the next one, while knitting keeps a large number of stitches open at a time. Etymology. The word crochet comes from the Old French crochet, a diminutive of crotch, in turn from the Germanic croc, all meaning hook. It was used in 17th-century French lace-making, crochet designating a stitch used to join separate pieces of lace, and crochet subsequently designating both a specific type of fabric and the hooked needle used to produce it, although that fabric is not known to be crochet in the present sense. A genealogical relationship between the techniques sharing that name appears likely. Origins. Knitted textiles survive from early periods, but the first substantive evidence of crocheted fabric relates to its appearance in Europe during the 19th century. Earlier work identified as crochet was commonly made by nali binding, a separate looped yarn technique. The first known published instructions for crochet appeared in the Dutch magazine, Penelope, in 1823. This includes a color plate showing 5 different style purses, of which 3 were intended to be crocheted with silk thread. The first is simple open crochet, a mesh of chain stitch arches. The second starts in a semi-open form, where chain stitch arches alternate with equally long segments of slip stitch crochet, and closes with a star made with double crochet stitches. The third purse is made entirely in double crochet. The instructions prescribe the use of a tambour needle and introduce a number of decorative techniques. The earliest dated reference to garments made of cloth produced by looping yarn with a hook, shepherd's knitting, is in The Memoirs of a Highland Lady, by Elizabeth Grant. The journal entry, itself, is dated 1812 but was not recorded in its subsequently published form until sometime between 1845 and 1867, and the actual date of publication was first in 1898. Nonetheless, the 1833 volume of Penelope describes and illustrates a shepherd's hook, and recommends its use for crochet with coarser yarn. In 1842, one of the numerous books discussing crochet that began to appear in the 1840s states, crochet needles, sometimes called shepherd's hooks, are made of steel, ivory, or boxwood. They have a hook at one end similar in shape to a fish hook, by which the wool or silk is caught and drawn through the work. These instruments are to be procured of various sizes. 2 years later, the same author writes, crochet, a species of knitting originally practiced by the peasants in Scotland, with a small hooked needle called a shepherd's hook, has, within the last 7 years, aided by taste and fashion, obtained the preference over all other ornamental works of a similar nature. It derives its present name from the French, the instrument with which it is worked being by them, from its crooked shape. Termed crochet, this art has attained its highest degree of perfection in England, whence it has been transplanted to France and Germany, and both countries, although unjustifiably, have claimed the invention. An instruction book from 1846 describes shepherd or single crochet as what in current British usage is either called single crochet or slip stitch crochet, with US. American terminology always using the latter. It similarly equates double and French crochet, notwithstanding the categorical assertion of a purely British origin. There is solid evidence of a connection between French tambour embroidery and crochet. The former method of production was illustrated in detail in 1763 in Diderot's Encyclopedia. The tip of the needle shown there is indistinguishable from that of a present-day inline crochet hook, and the chain stitch separated from a cloth support is a fundamental element of the latter technique. The 1824 Penelope instructions unequivocally state that the tambour tool was used for crochet, and the first of the 1840s instruction books uses the terms tambour and crochet as synonyms. This equivalence is retained in the fourth edition of that work, 1847. The strong taper of the shepherd's hook eases the production of slip-stitch crochet, but is less amenable to stitches that require multiple loops on the hook at the same time. Early yarn hooks were also continuously tapered, but gradually enough to accommodate multiple loops. The design with a cylindrical shaft that is commonplace today was largely reserved for tambour-style steel needles. Both types gradually merged into the modern form that appeared towards the end of the 19th century, including both tapered and cylindrical segments, and the continuously tapered bone hook remained in industrial production until World War II. The early instruction books make frequent reference to the alternate use of ivory, bone, or wooden hooks and steel needles in a handle, as appropriate to the stitch being made, taken with the synonymous labeling of shepherd's and single crochet, and the similar equivalence of French and double crochet. There is a strong suggestion that crochet is rooted both in tambour embroidery and shepherd's knitting, leading to thread and yarn crochet respectively, a distinction that is still made. The locus of the fusion of all these elements, the invention noted above, has yet to be determined, as does the origin of shepherd's knitting. Shepherd's hooks are still being made for local slip-stitch crochet traditions. The form in the accompanying photograph is typical for contemporary production. A longer continuously tapering design intermediate between it and the 19th century tapered hook was also in earlier production, commonly being made from the handles of forks and spoons. Irish crochet. In the 19th century, as Ireland was facing the Great Irish Famine, crochet lacework was introduced as a form of famine relief. Mademoiselle Rigaud de la Blanchardera is generally credited with the invention of Irish crochet, publishing the first book of patterns in 1846. Irish lace became popular in Europe and America, and was made in quantity until the First World War. Modern practice and culture. Fashions in crochet changed with the end of the Victorian era in the 1890s. Crocheted laces in the new Edwardian era, peaking between 1910 and 1920, became even more elaborate in texture and complicated stitching. The strong Victorian colours disappeared, though, and new publications called for white or pale threads, except for fancy purses, which were often crocheted of brightly coloured silk and elaborately beaded. After World War I, far fewer crochet patterns were published, and most of them were simplified versions of the early 20th century patterns. After World War II, from the late 1940s until the early 1960s, there was a resurgence in interest in home crafts, particularly in the United States, with many new and imaginative crochet designs published for colorful doilies, potholders, and other home items, along with updates of earlier publications. These patterns called for thicker threads and yarns than in earlier patterns and included wonderful variegated colors. The craft remained primarily a homemaker's art until the late 1960s and early 1970s, when the new generation picked up on crochet and popularized granny squares, a motif worked in the round and incorporating bright colors. Although crochet underwent a subsequent decline in popularity, the early 21st century has seen a revival of interest in handcrafts and DIY, as well as great strides in improvement of the quality and varieties of yarn. There are many more new pattern books with modern patterns being printed, and most yarn stores now offer crochet lessons in addition to the traditional knitting lessons. There are many books you can purchase from local bookstores to teach yourself how to crochet, whether it be as a beginner or intermediate. There are also many books for children and teenagers who are hoping to take up the hobby. Filet crochet, Tunisian crochet, tapestry crochet, broomstick lace, hairpin lace, crow hooking, and Irish crochet are all variants of the basic crochet method. Crochet has experienced a revival on the catwalk as well. Christopher Cahn's Fall 2011 ready-to-wear collection makes intensive use of the granny square, one of the most basic of crochet motifs. In addition, crochet has been utilized many times by designers on the popular reality show Project Runway. Even websites such as Etsy and Ravelry have made it easier for individual hobbyists to sell and distribute their patterns or projects across the internet. Elaine Wiles released a music video titled Straight Hookin', which makes a play on the word hookers, which has a double meaning for both one who crochets and a prostitute. Materials. Basic materials required for crochet are a hook and some type of material that will be crocheted, most commonly yarn or thread. Additional tools are convenient for keeping stitches counted, measuring crocheted fabric, or making related accessories. Examples include cardboard cutouts, which can be used to make tassels, fringe, and many other items, a pom-pom circle, used to make pom-poms, a tape measure and a gauge measure, both used for measuring crocheted work and counting stitches, a row counter, and occasionally plastic rings, which are used for special projects. In recent years, yarn selections have moved beyond synthetic and plant and animal-based fibers to include bamboo, kiwi, hemp, and banana stalks, to name a few. Crochet hook. The crochet hook comes in many sizes and materials, such as bone, bamboo, aluminium, plastic, and steel. Because sizing is categorized by the diameter of the hook's shaft, a crafter aims to create stitches of a certain size in order to reach a particular gauge specified in a given pattern. If gauge is not reached with one hook, another is used until the stitch is made of the needed size. Crafters may have a preference for one type of hook material over another due to aesthetic appeal, yarn glide, or hand disorders such as arthritis, where bamboo or wood hooks are favored over metal for the perceived warmth and flexibility during use. Hook grips and ergonomic hook handles are also available to assist crafters. Steel crochet hooks range in size from 0.4 to 3.5 mm, or from 00 to 16 in American sizing. These hooks are used for fine crochet work such as doilies and lace. Aluminium, bamboo, and plastic crochet hooks are available from 2.5 to 19 mm in size, or from B to S in American sizing. Artisan-made hooks are often made of hand-turned woods, sometimes decorated with semi-precious stones or beads. Crochet hooks used for Tunisian crochet are elongated and have a stopper at the end of the handle, while double-ended crochet hooks have a hook on both ends of the handle. There is also a double-hooked apparatus called a crow hook that has become popular. A hairpin loom is often used to create lacy and long stitches, known as hairpin lace. While this is not in itself a hook, it is a device used in conjunction with a crochet hook to produce stitches. See List of United States standard crochet hook and knitting needle sizes. Yarn for crochet is usually sold as balls or skeins, although it may also be wound on spools or cones. Skeins and balls are generally sold with a yarn band, a label that describes the yarn's weight, length, dye lot, fiber content, washing instructions, suggested needle size, likely gauge, etc. It is a common practice to save the yarn band for future reference, especially if additional skeins must be purchased. Crocheters generally ensure that the yarn for a project comes from a single dye lot. The dye lot specifies a group of skeins that were dyed together and thus have precisely the same color. Skeins from different dye lots, even if very similar in color, are usually slightly different and may produce a visible stripe when added onto existing work, if insufficient yarn of a single dye lot is bought to complete a project. Additional skeins of the same dye lot can sometimes be obtained from other yarn stores or online. The thickness or weight of the yarn is a significant factor in determining the gauge, i.e., how many stitches and rows are required to cover a given area for a given stitch pattern. Thicker yarns generally require large diameter crochet hooks, whereas thinner yarns may be crocheted with thick or thin hooks. Hence, thicker yarns generally require fewer stitches, and therefore less time, to work up a given project. Patterns and motifs are coarser with thicker yarns and produce bold visual effects, whereas thinner yarns are best for refined or delicate pattern work. Yarns are standardly grouped by thickness into 6 categories: superfine, fine, light, medium, bulky and super bulky. Quantitatively, thickness is measured by the number of wraps per inch. The related weight per unit length is usually measured in tex or denier. Before use, hanks are wound into balls in which the yarn emerges from the center, making crocheting easier by preventing the yarn from becoming easily tangled. The winding process may be performed by hand or done with a bowl winder and swift. A yarn's usefulness is judged by several factors, such as its loft, its resilience, its washability and color fastness, its hand, its durability against abrasion, its resistance to pilling, its hairiness, its tendency to twist or untwist, its overall weight and drape, its blocking and felting qualities, its comfort and its appearance, which includes its color, sheen, smoothness and ornamental features. Other factors include allergenicity, speed of drying, resistance to chemicals, moths and mildew, melting point and flammability, retention of static electricity, and the propensity to accept dyes. Desirable properties may vary for different projects, so there is no one best yarn. Although crochet may be done with ribbons, metal wire or more exotic filaments, most yarns are made by spinning fibers. In spinning, the fibers are twisted so that the yarn resists breaking under tension. The twisting may be done in either direction, resulting in an Z-twist or S-twist yarn. If the fibers are first aligned by combing them and the spinner uses a worsted-type drafting method such as the short forward draw, the yarn is smoother and called a worsted. By contrast, if the fibers are carded but not combed and the spinner uses a woolen drafting method such as the long backward draw, the yarn is fuzzier and called woolen spun. The fibers making up a yarn may be continuous filament fibers such as silk and many synthetics, or they may be staples. Naturally, filament fibers are sometimes cut up into staples before spinning. The strength of the spun yarn against breaking is determined by the amount of twist, the length of the fibers and the thickness of the yarn. In general, yarns become stronger with more twist, longer fibers and thicker yarns. For example, thinner yarns require more twist than do thicker yarns to resist breaking under tension. The thickness of the yarn may vary along its length. A slub is a much thicker section in which a mass of fibers is incorporated into the yarn. The spun fibers are generally divided into animal fibers, plant and synthetic fibers. These fiber types are chemically different, corresponding to proteins, carbohydrates and synthetic polymers, respectively. Plants used for fibers include cotton, flax, bamboo, ramie, hemp, jute, nettle, raffia, yucca, coconut husk, banana trees, soy and corn. Rayon and acetate fibers are also produced from cellulose mainly derived from trees. Common synthetic fibers include acrylics, polyesters such as dacron and ingeo, nylon and other polyamides, and olefins such as polypropylene. Of these types, wool is generally favored for crochet, chiefly owing to its superior elasticity, warmth and felting. However, wool is generally less convenient to clean and some people are allergic to it. It is also common to blend different fibers in the yarn, e.g., 85% alpaca and 15% silk. Even within a type of fiber, there can be great variety in the length and thickness of the fibers. For example, merino wool and Egyptian cotton are favored because they produce exceptionally long, thin fibers for their type. A single spun yarn may be crocheted as is, or braided or plied with another. implying two or more yarns are spun together, almost always in the opposite sense from which they were spun individually. For example, two Z twist yarns are usually plied with an S twist. The opposing twist relieves some of the yarn's tendency to curl up and produces a thicker, balanced yarn. Plied yarns may themselves be plied together, producing cabled yarns or multi-stranded yarns. Sometimes, the yarns being plied are fed at different rates, so that one yarn loops around the other, as in boucle. The single yarns may be dyed separately before plying, or afterwards to give the yarn a uniform look. The dyeing of yarns is a complex art. Yarns need not be dyed, or they may be dyed one color, or a great variety of colors. Dyeing may be done industrially, by hand or even hand-painted onto the yarn. A great variety of synthetic dyes have been developed since the synthesis of indigo dye in the mid-19th century. However, natural dyes are also possible, although they are generally less brilliant. The color scheme of a yarn is sometimes called its colorway. Variegated yarns can produce interesting visual effects, such as diagonal stripes. Process. Crocheted fabric is begun by placing a slip-knot loop on the hook, pulling another loop through the first loop, and repeating this process to create a chain of a suitable length. The chain is either turned and worked in rows, or joined to the beginning of the row with a slip stitch and worked in rounds. Rounds can also be created by working many stitches into a single loop. Stitches are made by pulling one or more loops through each loop of the chain. At any one time at the end of a stitch, there is only one loop left on the hook. Tunisian crochet, however, draws all of the loops for an entire row onto a long hook before working them off one at a time. Like knitting, crochet can be worked either flat or in the round.